I would like to demonstrate one AWS lab that is .NET workloads on AWS Lambda. So in this lab, I will show you that how we can deploy, modify, and invoke the .NET applications on AWS Cloud by using the IDE as well as the CLI. So in this lab, we will use the AWS Lambda service for serverless architecture. We have some basic objective like I will create and deploy the serverless .NET application on AWS Lambda by using the AWS serverless application model, that is AWS SAM template, which we are using for the deployment purpose. Another thing is we will create and deploy .NET application on AWS Lambda function, which will make call to Amazon's simple service, and it will return some values. We will invoke and deploy AWS Lambda function with the help of the command line. So these are some basic objective. I mean, in short, I can say that we will deploy one dummy application on AWS Lambda with the help of the SAM template. So this is our high level objective. Before starting the lab, we need to understand the environment of this lab, which is the most important. So in this lab, I would like to use the AWS CLI from this shell. Sorry, just a second. Yeah, here it is. So I would like to use the AWS CLI from the shell. This lab will be using the AWS Cloud9 ideally. So Cloud9 will provide each and everything for the .NET development, and we can create and deploy a Lambda function. Also, the AWS IAM roles will be used for those functions. And additionally, a bucket is also provided by this lab for storing and testing those Lambda function. As you can see in this architecture, so this is the overall architecture of that lab, which I would like to use it. Here I'm using the Cloud9 in public subnet, which is on AWS VPC, and the bucket is also placed outside, which is here. And there are three provided roles which we are using. First role is the ASP.NET Core Web App role. Another is the bucket get S3 bucket role, which we are using for the S3 bucket. And third one will be Lambda, which we are using. We will invoke the get S3 bucket role. So these are the three IAM roles which we are using in this lab. And let's come to the architecture part. So this is the most important architecture. So in this architecture, we will get the actual knowledge that how the whole application will work. So in the serverless stack main application, here we have API gateway, which is the .NET Core API, which will interact with the Lambda function, which is a .NET Core function. So here I will write some function which will interact with this API gateway. So as you can see here, we are using the Cloud9. So Cloud9 is one ideally. Inside that, we will create one .NET application which will interact with the AWS Lambda and do some calls with the AWS S3 bucket and give some values. So inside this Cloud9, we will create the Lambda, which will make some calls like get S3 calls, and this Lambda will call the S3 bucket and it will give some output. Here we are using the IAM roles, like for web, we are using the ASP.NET Core Web App role. Another is for the bucket role, get S3 bucket role. And third one is the invoke for calling that Lambda function. We are using the invoke get S3 bucket role. So there are three roles. We are using the resources like API, gateway, Lambda, and bucket, as well as the main component is AWS Cloud9. So this Cloud9 is the most important one. And the last one is the public subnet and inside the VPC that is known as the virtual private cloud. So it is simple. We will create one Lambda. It will do some calls on a S3 bucket. It will get some values back to the application. So these are the tools which we are using, as I have discussed, like Cloud Night for development purpose, Lambda for the backend function, which we will create it, S3 for the storage purpose, and SAM is a open source framework which we are using for building the serverless application. So here we will use for the deployment purpose by using the YAML file and inside that, different syntaxes are written for deployment purpose. So let's move towards the high-level task, which will be helpful. So first task, I would like to use the notepad before starting anything. Okay. So our task zero, like we will connect to the development environment. I hope it is visible. So we will use the development environment. Then we will review our development environment. This is task one. Okay. Here it is, we will create the ASP.NET Core project. This is task two. This is task three. We'll create a new .NET project for AWS Lambda function and name as get S3 buckets, and we'll deploy it in AWS. This is task four. We'll create a .NET project named get S3 and run the program locally. And this is the task 5, that is the final one. Here we'll create and use new Lambda function that invoke the previously created Lambda function and name that get S3 buckets. So these things we need to perform. So let's start the lab and do our work. It will take some time and provide it. As you can see, I will get access to the lab console lab. So it is taking some time. Before that, we can review our task that what we need to do. We need to connect to our development environment. Then we will review that environment. Afterwards, we will create the new ASP.NET project and deploy to AWS. So initially, we need to create the .NET project. Afterwards, we will create the new .NET project for AWS Lambda function, and we will name it as get SC buckets and deploy it. Afterwards, we will create the another new .NET project named as get S3 bucket call from local and run the program locally. We will create and use the new AWS Lambda function to invoke it previously created. I mean, which we have created this .NET Lambda project. We will invoke it and name it as get S3 buckets. So this thing we will do it. Before that, let's read the task once it gets completed. to the access.